Here we go. My name's Todd.
This is Cathy.
Welcome back to another episode of Zen Parenting Radio. This is podcast number 712. Why listen to Zen Parenting Radio? Because you'll feel outstanding. And always remember our motto, which is the best predictor of a child's well-being, is in fact a parent's self-understanding. Tease out today's show. Actually, before you tease it out, I'm just going to say hi to 3 new Team Zen members. You ready, sweetie?
Yes.
Robin from West Palm Beach, Stephanie from Houston, and Miona from Lake Placid, New York. I'm going to give them applause.
That's West Coast, Midwest, and East Coast.
That's right. So
I like that.
If you don't know what Team Zen is, check it out on our website. It's $25 a month. It's a way to talk to Cathy and I on Zoom, and we have a ton of other resources available on our Team Zen Circle page.
It's an app. So basically you can, it's like a place you can go get everything Zen parenting, plus connect with people that I think you'll have a lot in common with, plus get resources, plus talk to us. And it's just really easy, accessible. And right before we came down, I was eating and I felt the need to scroll, but instead of scrolling through things that make me stressed, like Twitter, I scrolled through our app.
Yeah.
And that was enjoyable.
It's actually a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
That should be like our tagline. Stop scrolling and start connecting.
Or just scroll through our app.
Well,
it's not a
I
great
think
tagline, but our app is
right.
positive.
But ours is more interactive, I would
Correct.
say. Whereas, Twitter or TikTok, it's more like mindless scrolling.
Well, yeah. Well, I was going to say, you'd be surprised, Todd, like that people put things up there that are really interesting to read. Like someone just put up a podcast that I'm going to listen to. Someone put up a really good speech from graduation. Like there's just a lot of it is us in our work, but a lot of it is other people just sharing. So anyway, just a great place to go.
And I forgot to tell you, but I came up with a Team Zen theme song. You ready?
Let's hear it. That's funny.
So can you tell the audience?
Is it because of all of our power dynamics?
That's right. What is this song?
What is it?
Yeah.
It's a theme to Succession.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why am I playing that today? Are we going to talk about it?
We're going to talk about Succession. But for those of you who are like, I didn't watch Succession, don't worry. You're not going to be totally lost because we're going to talk about the dynamics, the family dynamics, and we'll use Succession as the backdrop, but really anyone can relate.
If they wanted to come up with a theme song that just makes one uncomfortable,
this is it.
They do a good job with that because I hate that theme song and I think I'm not supposed to like it.
It's stressful.
It's a lot of strings.
And it's constantly going up, like it's constantly getting more tense.
Yes.
And more tense, and it doesn't decrease the tension.
Well, it's so funny because we just watched the series finale last night, and Succession goes down probably, I can't say it's my top 10 favorite shows because I never watched the 3rd season, but I will say when I think of the scoring of a show, I always think of Lost, the Lost finale. And the strings, I don't know what, there's all these different instruments that I don't pretend to understand. But in the Lost finale, it gave me such a sense of deep sadness.
Mm-hmm.
And this theme song to Succession I'm just rattled. Like it brings my tension and my stress in my body up. It's so interesting how instruments could give us feeling.
Well, and I think it's the notes. Like I don't know a lot about music, but a lot of flat notes, a lot of like they sound off. Like it's not the right way to say it. It's like the way that they are on top of each other, it's uncomfortable. So it's not like there's strings that soothe you and then there's strings that make you go cringe a little bit. But we're just, because of the show, this song becomes just a or the theme is just kind of like it gets you excited to watch.
Can I just share one more string thing in a
movie?
No, it's a Beatles song, A Day in the Life.
Okay.
And I'm going to play it.
Jeez.
Woke up.
So the reason I play that is it's also kind of haunting, right?
I got another one.
Oh, you got? What do you got?
I got there's a song by Janet Jackson called If.
Okay. Is that the one you put on my birthday playlist?
That's called Again. That's a sad song.
Yeah.
So there's just this part in it where it's just a bunch of strings. And I think they actually took it from a Supreme song, but I always think about it.
Is it at the beginning?
Play the beginning. This sounds like the video. Can you get to the song?
Is that how it is? It the
No, this must be a video. You're probably not in the right place, hon.
All right, let's go back.
It's not a song.
How about this one?
There you go. So listen to this. Well, that's all strings right before that. Yeah. And then the other one I'm thinking of.
What do you got?
It's you guys weren't listening to me the other night, and I kept trying to say, I think you were kind of listening to me, but I don't think anybody cared. I was talking about the Whitesnake song. Still of the Night.
Here I go.
No,
again.
That's Here I Go Again. That's a different one. So in Still of the Night, there's this part. It's like toward the end, and they like build up to it forever. And this dude plays his guitar with a bow.
Doesn't Jimmy Page do that a lot and lives up?
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I'm willing to believe that the guy in Whitesnake didn't create
all I know
that.
Is we started with the Beatles and we're ending at Whitesnake. That's all I gotta say.
So it's like toward the end. Keep going. Sorry, everybody, that you have to listen to this. Not Whitesnake, but Todd doing this. You're past it. You went too far.
Well, sorry, the fans are not going to be able to hear it.
But it's so good. And I
used it.
Well, put it this way. I'm still a Whitesnake fan, but when I was really into Whitesnake, I would play that song, and it's it's one of those songs that that's what you're waiting to hear, right? It culminates in that moment. And so it's a big buildup.
This is what I'm waiting to hear, sweetie.
Yeah, I love this song too.
This is the only Whitesnake song I know.
I believe that.
I don't know where I'm going.
This defines my wife. That's all I gotta say.
Songs of yesterday. I've made up my mind.
You want to know why?
He made it up his mind.
He made up his mind. This is one of my all-time favorite hair band songs. Obviously, I think a lot of people love it, but we all, when we listened to it, I was a junior in high school, we all thought we were so alone, that we were the ones.
Yeah, he was singing to you.
I know. I was like, I just am so alone, just like this guy, even though I wasn't at all, but it was the internal loneliness, right? It's the, here I go again on my own.
We got to wait for it to kick in, right?
All right.
It's kind of like an anthem for being single, right?
Yeah. And I just think, at that phase of your life, if you've been hurt or like a friend has left or you're just going through another breakup, you just think that you're just starting over again and again. And you really are.
Yeah. Okay. So we're 9 minutes in, haven't even started the content.
So we had to do some Janet Jackson, Whitesnake, Beatles, and Succession theme song. So here's the thing. We're going to talk about Succession, but we're going to talk about in terms of family culture and the things that can really get in the way. Now, Succession is an extreme example. For those of you who have watched it, you're going to know this. For those of you who haven't, I'll just give you the premise is that it's this family. It's a family that is based on, and this is kind of interesting, Todd. I'll read this to you because I found this. So the family is fictional. Okay. The Roys are fictional. So that's something that Jesse Armstrong, the creator, has said. They're fictional, but they're based on a lot of different families. The first one that everybody brings up is the Murdochs. You know who the Murdochs are?
Yeah.
Okay. So they're the Fox News people. And, what's his name? Rupert Murdoch has sons and he also has daughters. And there is always talk of there being like infighting and who's going to take over. And Rupert Murdoch still hasn't left as far as, we found out from this what was it? The Dominion lawsuit that Rupert Murdoch said he didn't have an active role, but then they found out during the lawsuit he actually did. So he's still, even in his 90s, it's such a Logan Roy move, right? Like he just is not leaving. So that's one of the families it's similar to. It's also similar to the Sulzbergers, which I didn't know this group. It's the people who own the New York Times. I guess their family has this kind of dynamic. The Hearsts, the Hearsts who were the, William Randolph Hearst family. They were newspaper moguls. The Maxwells, and this was really interesting. He was also a newspaper mogul, and his daughter was Ghislaine Maxwell, who was the woman who was helping Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh, wow.
And so she was just sentenced to prison a little bit ago, as we all know. And then the Carnegies, who Brian Cox, who plays Logan Roy, said that's who he pulled from for inspiration for his character. Basically a kid who had nothing, who grew up and figured out how to be this kind of I don't even want to use the word character, like this kind of force in the universe, because Logan Roy is not a very human person. Obviously he's a human being, but he doesn't act in a very human way. His whole goal, he dehumanizes people, and he uses people to get his needs met.
Yeah.
He is not somebody.
And his needs are power.
His needs are power. His needs are power and money. But I think power over money. Don't you think? I think that's something
money is a vehicle to power.
Correct. But once you have billions of dollars, getting another $1 billion doesn't mean anything.
Right.
So it's like, how do you keep power? So I just thought that was interesting, all the different families that they kind of pulled from. But so what are the lessons from Succession? I watch this show. I watch every show because of human behavior. So I watch a lot of cult shows. I watch a lot of scary things. I watch a lot of uncomfortable things like Succession. And I don't love them all, but there's something about watching how people relate to each other that is really interesting to me.
Interpersonal communication, relationship, all that good stuff.
Family dynamics, like history of trauma. You can see it. And people who are great, like shows that aren't that good, they don't have writers that do enough of the investigating into character development. But really good writers have really good background on their characters. And you're like, this makes sense. This is what would happen. And so it's just one of those shows that obviously Todd and I highly recommend. But these are kind of the things that I pulled out of it. And Todd, please, I'm coming in with my 3 things, but I want you to elaborate with things that you really noticed.
And you know what I'm coming in with, sweetie?
What?
I'm going to tell you what I'm coming in with.
Okay. Not true.
Well, I'll put it this way. I put no thought into this podcast. It's all Cathy, and I'm just going to riff off of what you say.
Okay. So the way I want to do this is I want to talk about the things that the kids were lacking and the things that we can learn from this show. Like, what were the things besides there's obvious things, the trauma they experienced, the world they grew up in, their dad being, neglectful or even cruel, their mom being really, neglectful. Like there's those obvious things, but it's like, what are the things in our own families that we can learn about? And the first one that I thought about was internal motivation versus external motivation.
Is there a difference between internal and intrinsic, or is it the same thing?
Same thing.
Okay.
So intrinsic motivation, extrinsic or external motivation, and then also internal validation versus external validation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because they're similar, but they're different in how we play them out. So the first thing, is talking about the Roys, because that's this family in Succession. They didn't have any internal motivation except to please their father or to be seen as their father.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't say they didn't have any. That was it. But they didn't have anything of their own.
The fact that the motivation came from their father means it was extrinsic.
Correct. And that their internal sense of self, like the things that
completely dependent upon
completely
what dad thinks of us.
Nobody, when they were children, honored them and were like, what are you interested in? What do you want to do? Who are you? They were pushed aside. They were put down. They were made to feel less than. And then the only time that they ever felt some sense of warmth is if their father gave them praise,
love.
During Shiv's, there's a scene where, and by the way, I'm going to say this, if you haven't watched Succession, there might be a few spoilers in here. We're going to try not to be so overt. But it's hard to talk about a show. I'm not going to like go through the whole finale, but I don't know exactly where we'll go.
So be forewarned.
Be forewarned. So, but there is a scene in the at a funeral where Shiv mentions to be, the time when my dad would spend time with me or talk to me or be around me, that's when I felt warmth.
Sure.
That's a very common experience, is when you have a narcissistic parent or when you have a parent that's neglectful, when they can be cruel to you all day long. But if there's a moment where they're actually engaged with you, you feel something that you aren't used to feeling the majority of your life.
Yeah.
And so everything was about getting that again, was finding that. And so, even we're not Roys, all of us listening, but it's like, how are we talking to our kids about having their own sense of self versus having
to please us
or the external world?
Do you think it's nature or nurture that? I think it's very normal, specifically when you're younger, like we want to be noticed by our best caregivers, right? We want to be
absolutely
validated and loved and seen. So one, it's normal. Two, too
and
much
biological.
of that, biological, because that's probably for our own safety. We got to make sure our caregivers love us, because if they don't, they'll stop loving
survival.
us. But then if it's too much, where our happiness is completely dependent upon whether or not my mom or dad loves me, that could be a problem too.
Well, it ends up being a lot of these other things that I've written down. We can end up having enmeshment. We can end up being really codependent. We can end up, emulating their behaviors, being just like them. We can end up, having no sense of self. What did Romans say? He said, we're just a bunch of eggshells with tape or something. Like, there's nothing, he kept saying, we're all BS.
Mm-hmm.
We're all BS. We're just a bunch of eggshells and tape, or like, basically meaning there's nothing in them of substance for them. And he realized that at the end. Like, they always knew it. They always knew it, which is why the only thing that made them feel of substance is having a parent, and not even a parent, their father, notice them. That's the only thing that filled them up. And that was always dependent on the moment, on the experience. They could not depend on it in any way, shape, or form in their lives.
For some reason, I'm thinking of the movie Wall Street, where Martin and Charlie Sheen are in the elevator, and Charlie Sheen says something like that. I just wanted you to be proud of me. That's all.
Yeah.
And Martin Sheen, and I'm sure that there's quite a bit of truthfulness in that scene. And Martin Sheen's like, it's yourself that you got to be proud of yourself.
And that's a very cliche thing, especially in a movie. But to your point, it's acted really well in Wall Street. Yeah. And what he's trying to say is, it's like, we can understand, of course, we want our parents to be proud of us, but I think our parents are proud of us when we're proud of ourselves. Now, the healthy parents are not parents who are working in their own self-interest, or who are narcissistic or super enmeshed or codependent, then that can be a little iffy. But the goal is, like, we've talked about this before, but the thing that I've really appreciated in raising my daughters is the experiences as a parent where you see them find something and find joy in it, and it fills them up. If it be music, if it be, a class they've taken, if it be an extracurricular activity, a sport, whatever, and you watch it take hold of them, not because you introduced it, but because they found it. And so they have a sense of ownership and pride. And then as a parent, I don't even know if the word is pride as much as appreciation of, like, oh my God, my kid has found something they love.
We did a podcast in year 2. So we're on 11 or 12. I don't know what year we're on.
We're on 13. Year 13. So
podcast number 68, we wrote, this is what we titled, this just said, don't tell your children you're proud of them. And then I'm sure you probably wrote this, sweetie. Instead of telling your children you are proud, why not ask them how they feel about what they did? Instead of having them impress you, why don't you ask them to reflect on their sense of accomplishment? It's a great way to get them intrinsically motivated.
And that's what we're talking about here. It's interesting. That was our, you guys have to go back a decade, but that was our most controversial show. I would say, I mean, we've had other shows where people have had comments, but I just remember so much pushback on that one.
Mhm.
And the thing is it's not, you don't have to take it so literally. Of course, you can tell your children you're proud of them occasionally. It's not like, don't use that word. That's dumb. What we're saying is, if our children are only motivated by us being proud of them, then just the nature of what we're proud of them about, is it our desires? Is it our dreams? Are we like, saying we're proud because they did something we wanted them to do?
It's like Greg
versus-
Brady wanting to be an architect, sweetie. Let's
Right,
be honest.
right.
But
He really wanted to be Johnny Bravo.
you just want to be Johnny Bravo. It's interesting because I think you're right. Like, I am not a fan of saying to my kids that I'm proud of them, because there's an ick factor in it for me. Like, oh, please the
Please me.
father
Yeah.
figure, blah, blah,
Mhm.
blah. But I'd be much more likely to say it if it's something that they did on something they wanted to do that
On
had
their
nothing to
terms.
do with me.
Yep. Well, and I do now say occasionally that I say I'm proud of you for, but it's always about because of you made this choice on your own.
Yeah, you
or
just graduated
because,
high school.
yeah, like look at the accomplishments. Like, so again, like I said, it's not about never saying that. It's about being clear about why and when you're saying it.
Yeah.
Because if you're proud because your kids are pleasing you,
Mhm.
then that is driving their external
Right.
motivation, where everything becomes about your feelings versus what helps them feel like they're thriving.
Sure.
It's really, and I want to say it's subtle, but it's not that subtle.
No.
Like they know, when kids tell me they have, because I do talk to a lot of teens, a lot of college students, when they tell me what their interests are, that something really lights them up, and then they say, but I can't tell my parents.
Yeah.
To me, that's very sad.
Totally sad.
Because it's something that they have realized that feels in alignment with who they are. If it be, I've told Todd about a lot of my students over the years, but students who've been like, I have to study this, or I can't go into social work because my parents want me to be in business, or I wanted to minor in photography, but my parents said I should be minoring in this instead, or I want to do, this a cappella group, but my parents think that distracts from my studies. It's like, we're directing their lives. We're becoming too involved.
And we usually direct it because we love them and we want to keep them safe. And like the business thing is easiest. Like, oh, go to business school because there's a lot of job security in there. I understand that parents will say that. And I don't want to say, I just want to say out loud, I understand why a parent would say that.
Sure.
And let's let these kids figure out their own journey.
Mm-hmm.
And if it means that they're not going to make a lot of money because they're not going into a business school, I think if you happen to be somebody who loves something and chooses to do that one thing for a living, they're going to be pretty good at it. And if they get to be pretty good at it, whether it's playing the violin or playing in a band or being a physical therapist, like abundance will show up if you do what is that you love, and most of the time.
There's many pathways. Like they may start with something and it leads to something else that leads to something else. Like pathways they're not linear.
Yeah.
Things run into each other. You meet someone, you do this changes. Like, I in hindsight now can look at my life. And my dad told me this all the time. He's like, you're going to look back and understand why everything was the way it was. You can't do it in the moment, and we shouldn't force ourselves to see the path. But now I look back and I'm like, this went to this and this went to this and this happened for this. Like, I see how I got to where I am. And I took a lot of, I wouldn't say they were wrong turns. They were just like, oh, I think I'll try this. I'm going to be this.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden I'm like, I am not happy doing this. And then I moved on to but I had to have that experience to get to the next place.
Sure.
And so trusting our kids in that process of learning, rather than directing them in a linear fashion to first you do this, then you do this, that to me is somewhat controlling.
Sure.
That to me is micromanaging. That's like adult helicopter parenting, like where we're still telling them how to do things. Now, the thing is, there is a balance. Like you were just saying, telling our kids, it makes sense to talk to them about finances and about what, how much it costs for an apartment. And if they're like, hey, I'm going to live in New York and do this thing, it's like, okay, do you know how much it costs to live in New York? Like there are real life experiences that they need to understand. And if we have good communication with them, good connection with them, that door opens for them to ask our opinion about things. And so there is a place. It doesn't mean, again, it's always this swing where we're either like over controlling or we're not doing anything. And the goal is always that place in the middle, that place where it's like, we don't direct them, but then when they ask for advice, we can offer the wisdom of our life.
Sure.
Like our girls, I want them to figure out what they want to major in college. I'm not going to take part in that. That's their lives. But there's also things to take into consideration. Like my oldest daughter had an opportunity this summer to be a research assistant. And she was, thinking, should I do that? Or should I do this other thing? And when she asked my advice, I'm like, take these opportunities that are being handed to you. And again, if she wouldn't have done it, she's an adult. That's her choice. But she asked my opinion.
Yeah.
And so I shared, this makes a lot of sense. But I also don't feel as if, but everything else, she's choosing her own way. And then she just wants some support along the way.
Yeah.
So it's just it's just this balance. And, finishing this one up, and the internal versus external validation is similar. Like these overlap in many ways, but we also want our kids to feel that their lives are meaningful because what they feel inside is lining up. Because if you go through life trying to line up all your externals so you feel good, like, here's my partner, these are the amount of friends I have, these are the things I do, this is what I do for a living, this is the amount of money I make, it's all external.
Well, it's funny, like social media is such an interesting, I didn't think about it until just now, but like, our addiction to likes and our addiction to views, and that's all external validation, right?
It is. It's all looking to the outside world to say you're good enough.
Yes.
And the thing that we're hoping, all these things we talk about on the show, all these conversations we hope to have with our children are about them trusting what goes on inside of them, where sometimes they're doing things that other people won't understand. And I don't mean that in like they become conspiracy theorists, like this isn't like off the rails. It's things like someone offers them a job that pays a certain amount of money, and someone offers them a different job that pays them maybe less, and they take the one for less because they're like, this feels more in alignment with who I am. And it may not be the one that everybody wanted me to take. It could be like right now, most kids have now chosen a school for next year in this, 2023 class, but they may have gotten into an Ivy, but then they choose a school closer to home because it feels more like them. So they're not going to get that external validation, but they know internally what's right for them.
So where I go, for some reason, I'm thinking back on the social media, how we're addicted as a human species to get likes on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. And what I want to say is that we are all miracles, every single one of us. And each one of us, the fact that we were even created and born is like insanely improbable. And that we never need to do anything to prove our value.
We already are.
We already are, just by the nature of our existence. And I know that may seem hoity-toity or like very kind of new agey,
spiritual,
but it's the truth.
Yep.
And if we could believe that, then we can go like do all these amazing things. But if we're always do it from the outside in versus the inside out, it just doesn't work as well.
Well, this is the way I look at it. Okay, there's all this unlearning we have to do from our childhood, right? Things we learned that were like, oh, that wasn't really true, or things that people told us that we had to like unwind because it took us down the wrong path, or believing that external validation makes us worthy. And as adults, we've had enough experiences, hopefully, we've had people in our lives that have died, or we've had maybe a close brush with an illness, or we're dealing with an illness or a divorce or something that's been really life altering. And we've looked at life in such a different way where we see the only thing that matters is how we feel about ourselves, our connection to others, our trust in, something bigger, whatever you want to call that, and that we see life for what it is. So why are we teaching our children something different than that? Why do we believe we need to run them through this machine? And then someday they go through, if it'd be a 25 or 35 or 55, they go through some kind of midlife crisis where they realize what life's all about. Why don't we raise them with an understanding of what life's all about?
Right.
And they're still going to go through hardship, and they're still going to have to learn, and they're still going to have challenges. It's not as if that, they may end up having a lot of earlier challenges because they take different paths and different roads.
Yeah.
But then they're still in alignment with themselves versus all of my clients, every person that I work with or I have worked with, or every teenager that I'm talking to, they're trying to unwind all this crap that didn't serve them. And what they're figuring out is exactly this: internal validation, internal, motivation. And why not, I'm repeating what I said, but let's help our kids understand that early. They're still going to be, at the mercy of social media and external, praise. It's not like they're going to not have that experience, but maybe they can have a little stronger sense of self as they go through it.
So as I'm thinking about this, I can think of moms and dads listening to this being, great, Todd and Cathy, how do I do this? And the answer, as it always is model it. Like how I still externally validate things.
We all have
like,
it. Yeah.
So literally this may be like a frustrating invitation, but the best way of teaching this to your kids is for us to do it ourselves.
Well, and that's the thing is these aren't, everything in life, as you guys know, we say all the time, it's paradoxical. So nobody goes through life and doesn't care at all about external validation. We all want praise. We all want to be told we're good enough. We all want to, make a certain amount of money or demonstrate to the world that we have some kind of skill. That's okay. But is that it? Or do you also have a sense of self where if those things and when those things fall away, you still have a foundation? Yeah. You're like, okay, that was icing on the cake. That was interesting. That was fun. That was a path. And now I have the sense of self. Again, Romans saying, eggshells and tape. I'm not eggshells and tape. Like I know who I am. And that wasn't all of who I am. So you don't teach like none of that matters. Of course it matters. People like likes. They like to be praised. They like when people comment on their work, but that's not all of life. And
to what degree is it that you're basing your own value on?
Correct. And do you have a healthy balance of the two? Sure. And not a perfect balance, but a sense, again, a foundation, in the book I wrote in Zen Parenting, the book, I based it on chakras. And the first chakra, the root chakra, is all about establishing that sense of foundation, the sense of belonging, reminding our kids that exactly what Todd just said, that because you're here, you belong. Like you don't have to prove to me that you're worthy of being here on this earth or as my child or whatever. You already belong because you're here. And establishing that in the way we talk to kids and valuing them and honoring them, that sets a foundation that's the roots from where they grow. And so, and for parents who maybe didn't do that as much when they were little, you can do it now. There's no time limit on this necessarily.
There's a million examples of what I will consider bad parenting, but the movie that just flashed in my eyes as you were talking,
what
was in Boogie Nights, where
the mom
in Boogie Nights, what's his name? Adams. What's Dirk Diggler's real name in that movie?
Something Adams. You're right.
Eddie Adams.
Eddie Adams. That's it.
Yeah.
Good.
So Eddie's like a 17-year-old kid, and his mom is just, oh my God, like the worst.
Yeah. Well, she's just not well.
Yeah. She's not well.
She's not well.
We should we should just play a bunch of movie clips of bad parenting on this podcast. See how that lands.
Yeah. And just remembering, and I feel like I have to do this as a social worker all the time, that those parents who we're calling bad parents struggled and were probably traumatized as well. You have to see the cycle. It doesn't mean they're let off the hook or that their behavior doesn't need to change. It just means it doesn't come out of thin air. People hurt people, and people who have never seen or experienced another kind of role model practice what they experienced.
Yeah.
They do the same thing.
Yeah. Right on.
Okay. So can I go on to number 2?
Sure, babe.
Okay. So as we said, the first one was internal, external motivation or validation. The second one is talking about enmeshment. Okay. The family in Succession, I feel like we totally got lost from Succession, but the family in Succession is completely enmeshed. Okay.
So just so I know, is it enmeshed
Yes.
or enmeshed?
Enmeshed. I mean,
What did you just say?
ENM.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of enmeshed.
It sounds like everybody's always saying enmeshment.
Right.
Enmeshment, but it's enmeshment. Okay.
Yeah. So enmeshment is the relationship between two or more people where the boundaries are really permeable, like where they're unclear. You know what I mean? They like flow in and out of each other. In an enmeshed relationship, there is no emotional independence. There's no separation, especially between parent and child. This can lead to a child's inability to form individual thoughts and like having their own beliefs and their own behaviors. They're so overlapping with their parents or their family that they don't even know where they began and their parent ends.
Yeah, there's no separation.
There's no separation. So I wanted to read. And so how is this related to Succession? How is it not? I mean, these kids are so enmeshed with a narcissistic parents that they don't have any sense of self. They don't. And so again, because they don't know what they like or what they're interested in, like, it's really interesting because, you know, Shiv in season 1, she's the daughter. I found her to be so interesting in season 1 because she actually is working against her father. She's working for a news organization. Let's say that ATC, which is the news ATN, which is the news organization that Logan Roy runs. Let's say that's Fox, because that's how they're kind of, you know, saying it is. And then Shiv worked for like a MSNBC, you know, like a more liberal leaning. And she was also supporting a presidential nominee that was much more liberal. That was the Democratic nominee. So it was like, she was interesting in that she was kind of had a different, you know, belief system, but we come to find out that was more about being the antithesis of him. That really wasn't her own beliefs.
Yeah.
Because wasn't it at the end of season 1 or maybe the beginning of season 2 where he says, you know, I really kind of wanted you to come in, and she's like, okay, I'll drop everything.
Yeah.
Like
so she departed her values in a moment's notice. When daddy said, why don't you come join my team?
And were they even values, or were they just her trying to push against him?
Yeah.
You know, so again, I just wanted to read a few things about enmeshment for those of us who are like, am I like dealing with this in my own family? So a person who may have enmeshed relationships would include someone who does not have a strong sense of self, which is what we're talking about, depends on others to provide validation, cannot function well alone, has difficulty acting alone and having a level of independence within a relationship, is unable to think or act separately from the family without feeling like they're betraying their family, does not engage in activities for their own enjoyment, but instead looks to others to figure out what to do most of the time.
So if somebody's listening to this and they're asking themselves, am I enmeshed with my dad, or am I enmeshed with my daughter? You don't have to check all those boxes.
No.
It could just be a few of them to a certain degree. And, you know, who knows like how to actually diagnose it, but.
And it's not even really a diagnosable thing. It's like a word to kind of notice your boundaries.
Yeah.
Which we're going to get into boundaries in a second. But Todd, here's some examples in a family. For example, a mother who calls her son's ex-girlfriend to ask why she broke up with him.
Yikes.
That's some enmeshment. That's like where the mom is just as hurt.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? A person who cannot make simple life decisions without consulting her parents or his parents about everything. Again, it's okay for kids to consult their parents about certain things. The parents should be that support system. But if there's a child who literally can't do anything, and this could be adult children too, Todd.
Of course.
You know,
it's more glaring when you see adult children.
Yeah. A family member who takes it personally when someone else in the family wants to move away or wants to take a job that they didn't think was what they were going to do.
Sure.
A parent who relies on her child for support through a divorce. You know, like if there's a divorce going on and the parent like makes a child their partner, or, you know, wants to like unload on their child. A person who has no understanding of activities that he or she enjoys and instead takes on the interests of the family or the closest friends.
Yeah.
You know, the person who really, again, there's nothing, they don't have their own. They only have others.
Yeah.
And there is a healthy balance in like, you know, Todd is interested in some things that I wasn't interested in. And then I learned from him and now I am interested in those things.
But you still aren't playing pickleball.
No. Well, that's because you don't ask me to as much because I'm not as good as you and you're very competitive.
I will ask you sometimes when I am in a certain mindset.
Right.
Which means I want to go have fun with my sweetie. But if it's, I want to go get a good workout and become better at pickleball, I will not ask you.
Will you be my partner when we play Wii tennis?
Yeah, you're pretty good. You've got a little ways to go, but you're doing well.
How about when I just try and hit it and the ball never hits my pad?
No, it's not that. You always like, what button do I press? And I'm like, there's no buttons. Just swing the thing.
A or B.
A or B. And it's neither. Okay. You just swing it.
So Todd likes a lot of sports. So I try to engage occasionally because he likes those things
Yeah.
or games.
Are you telling me you're only playing Wii because
I wouldn't have who I am. I would probably not buy a Wii, but because we have a Wii, I will play with you. So just like you wouldn't,
I think it's the best investment we've ever made myself.
You wouldn't listen to Whitesnake or Backstreet Boys.
Oh, Backstreet Boys, I'm in on.
You're in on it because of me.
I know.
You would, but that's my
you're
point.
not in on Wii or pickleball. I am in on Backstreet Boys.
But I am in on Wii and pickleball because I play. You're not. Like, my whole point is that we have enhanced each other's lives with the things we're interested in. We have introduced things to each other rather than me, needing your stuff.
Sweetie.
What?
Yeah.
Who says yeah? Which one is that?
It's Brian.
Oh, Brian.
You are my fire.
I've seen these guys in concert, by the way.
Dude, I
Desire.
invite you to these concerts.
It's true.
It's because of me.
When I say I want it that way, but we
Really hard to turn the song off. And I hope all my friends make fun of me for loving the song because it's a great song.
Everybody loves this song.
Right. Even the people that say they don't love it, they
It's
love
dumb.
it.
It's part of our like cultural awareness. Like, it's just one of those songs everybody knows.
Oh, tell me what.
One time, so Todd and I've seen Backstreet Boys about, I don't know, like 7 or 8 times, but Todd's gone with me about 4 times. And one of the times that we were there, we got to be VIPs. Do you remember?
Yeah, Paul Bradley set us up.
Yes, we were in Northerly Island and in Chicago, and we were like there with like 10 other people, just talking with them.
You got close to Brian and AJ and Howie and Nick,
Kevin. Yes.
Look at that. I just rattled them all off.
Thanks. So point being is we share with each other, and that's great. But if you are somebody who doesn't have, like, you're basically just pulling your identity from other people's things, that is, that's its whole thing. But that's an enmeshment thing where you're like, I don't know what's mine and what's somebody else's.
Yeah.
And sometimes we end up sharing it. Like all these things we're talking about are not matter of fact. They're all on a continuum. They're all,
it's not this or that.
It's not this or that. It's not black and white. It's all nuanced as all things are. But so this is important too. The opposite of enmeshment is disengagement. And that's when personal and relational boundaries are so rigid and family members come and go without any knowledge of each other. Like, that's like almost neglectful, where people don't know each other at all. And so you're so like disengaged.
Yeah. And there's times when I am in my computer and one of my kids will walk in and I'll check to see how they are and they say fine, but I don't tune in. There's sometimes some disengagement that I practice.
Well, I would say you have disengaged moments just like every human being. So do I.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody does, but I'm talking about disengagement as a practice.
So
where, like, if you are a parent right now who has no idea what your kids are interested in and you're not asking questions and you're like completely like, oh, I don't care, teenagers, whatever, that's disengagement of their lives.
So if there's an
X
axis, on one side it's enmeshment, on the other side it's disengagement. My center of gravity, I would hope, would be right there smack dab in the middle, right?
Yeah, that's the goal.
But in all honesty, I think I lean slightly towards the disengagement.
I think so, Todd. I think you're I know you're trying to be vulnerable, and I'm not trying to tell you what to think. It's just that I think these words are strong, and I don't think you are ever disengaged.
No, there's probably other words, like more adjectives we need to get, because disengagement is all the way at the end.
Correct.
And enmeshment's all the way at the other end.
Logan Roy is disengaged.
Right.
He could care less what his kids are interested in. All he's interested in is what he's interested in.
Yeah.
That's disengagement.
Yeah.
But we can notice, like if we take the word as more of an adjective, we can notice when we are disengaged.
So how about this? If I think all human beings, like the odds of some being smack dab in the middle and having a healthy relationship is not realistic.
Right.
And it's more like, which way does one person, like if there's somebody listening and they think of, if they're in a couple, if they're in a partnership, it's possible that both parents might be closer to the enmeshed,
Right.
or both parents might be closer to the disengaged, or one might be on one side, one might be on the other. I just think it's an interesting exercise to say, what's your center of gravity?
Yeah. And instead of it being a label for you, maybe think about it as your tendencies.
Yeah.
These are kind of enmeshed tendencies, or because I definitely lean much more toward enmeshment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I do become overly emotionally involved in things where sometimes I can't feel the difference between myself and what my girls are experiencing. And I also get very interested in what they're interested in. I love sometimes the music they share.
I would
with me.
say you're a little more enmeshed with the world.
I know.
We saw a few squirrels, let's just say, playing out front today, and they looked like they were kind of like mad at each other.
Yeah.
And you said something like, I think we should go help them, or something like that. And I'm like,
we needed to break that up. There was some Me Too things going on out there in nature. And I was like, they need to get up with the times, because one squirrel was not interested.
And the other squirrel was interested.
Very interested.
And you're like, and you didn't say, I don't think we should. You're like, what if we went out there and tried to?
I said, I'm feeling the need to break this up.
And you can't tell, I had zero interest. And it's probably for me watching Channel 11 nature shows, because there are these people with a video camera that has a really high lens, a good lens, and there's a gazelle getting eaten by a lion.
Right.
You just don't get in the way of that.
I know. And honestly, I didn't get in the way of it, nor do I
but your
really think they need me. Right.
Is...
Well, let me give you an example of something that I pay attention to. I noticed in the news last week that there were some people in Yellowstone, and there was a bison who had kind of like the rest of the bison had crossed the street or the road, and there was a baby bison left on the other side, and some people were trying to guide it, and they were touching it and kind of trying to get it across the road. And guess what happened?
It's a bad idea.
The mother
didn't want
that baby in the herd anymore
because they touched it.
So they had to euthanize it.
So crazy.
And I guess my point in saying that is that's like a sad story to note it, to be over involved. Like we're not such an awful story.
Listen to Zen Parenting Radio. We'll inspire you, everybody.
Baby bison. But so my point about the squirrels is I'm not really going to engage. My feelings, though, are like I'm kind of annoyed because I'm humanizing these squirrels.
I remember we had some landscapers, and he was telling me a story about a little bunny hutch, and there's a bunch of bunny there. And the guy's like, "Do not touch them.
Don't touch,
because if you do, the mom, what's that? What is that? Moms are so great in nature, and everything's so great, and they'll like give themselves up. But if they smell at all like a human, they're like, you know what? I'm not interested.
But you're humanizing them. You're making it sound like they understand something different.
Yeah.
Their whole way of knowing this is their child is the way they smell.
So is that why it's not? So does the,
you're acting as if they're conscious, like they don't smell good. I'm going to leave.
I know you don't know the answer to this question, but is the mama buffalo or the mama bunny rabbit, does it really not think that that's its baby?
It obviously, Todd. I mean, just by
I thought it's like this. My baby is now contaminated with human smell, so I'm not going to help it.
We're saying the same thing, though. The baby doesn't smell like it's mine, or this baby, there's something different about it. I don't know enough. I'm not an animal expert, but there's something about that cuts off the mother's ability to recognize this child.
Yeah.
So whatever the logistics of that are, whatever the details, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's not like you said, you're saying, oh, moms are so great, but they leave a baby behind. They're not intending to do that.
Yeah.
That's not their intention, but something gets in the way. It's like why I didn't disturb the squirrels, because this may be the way they mate.
This is how they dance.
It's just, it seemed a little aggressive from my end.
Yeah, it was an interesting morning. Let's just say that.
Like
we should do
one
of those Zen parenting animations and see what the animator can do with this segment.
Oh, we were sitting by the window for a long time.
All right. So
and I was I'm like, run. And then she wouldn't run.
No.
And then we were like, well, maybe this is the way.
Yeah. Well, there's so many great mating dances. There's that bird there's the male bird that cleans up his little space.
Yeah.
And then he does this crazy ass dance.
Yes.
To impress.
And like slides titles.
Yeah, right.
So
funny.
And what's so funny is when then it doesn't work.
No.
Because the other bird's like, no thanks.
And you just feel his disappointment, like, oh, this poor guy.
He's like, I laid it all out there.
He got vulnerable and he got his ass handed to him. He sure did.
He did the dance.
How many more do you have, by the way?
Oh, just one.
Okay, good.
So I want to finish Enmeshment with this, though, that going to Succession again, Logan Roy uses condemnation and emotional currency through the whole show. Like that's how he controls his kids. He praises another child above another when they do what he wants them to do. If Roman is engaging with his dad, then he's like, you're the one, and the other ones suck. Or, if it's with Kendall or if it's with Shiv, he uses that enmeshment to mess with them. And the description is like, think about it this way, like those kids are already very rich.
Yeah.
One of my favorite lines was from like an episode like about 5 weeks ago when Mattson is trying to like talk Kendall into like a new deal. And Mattson's like, I'm just trying to make you rich, man. And Kendall's like, already rich.
Yeah, check.
Like
that
he's
box
like,
has been checked.
I'm already rich. So, but these kids are already like set up for their lifetimes financially.
Generationally, their grandchildren's grandchildren are set up.
Billionaires. So they don't need from their dad anything financial. They just want his attention.
Yeah.
So it's
right.
often described as like golden handcuffs. Like they just want him, like they're trying to, deal with their narcissistic father as if they're going to get anywhere with him, and they're not. So, and he's emotionally abusive. So anyway, let's do the last one, number 3.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the need in a family, the importance of having strong boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's the truth when it comes to codependency or narcissism or just anything in between. Like the ability to have boundaries in your life where you do know where you begin and end.
Mm-hmm.
So you do know what feels okay and what doesn't, or you are in the practice of knowing it. Because obviously sometimes we miss the boat on that. Sometimes we think we're doing something for us, and then we recognize later we were doing it for everybody else. Or sometimes we're like setting a boundary that's too rigid, and then we realize we have to be more compassionate. Like there's all sorts of interplay in here because it's a practice. But just for clarity, codependence, codependency means that you feel responsible for other people's feelings and happiness. So codependent parents are like obsessed with talking about their children's needs or dealing with their children's needs. Instead of tending to their own feelings, they take on the emotions of their children. I have struggled with this. I have talked about, my therapist doesn't like when I say I'm codependent. She just says you have codependent tendencies, because I'm not all the time.
Sure.
I really do know where I begin
that
and
doesn't
end.
sum anybody up. Even Logan Roy, who's this fictional character, he's a narcissist for sure, but he probably has moments of, not many, but loving, charitable, blah, blah, blah. It's just one label does not define anybody.
Yeah. The only time I ever saw Logan be somewhat that way was with his intimate relationships, like at the beginning with Marcia.
Or with the security guard, his best friend.
With his best buddy.
Yeah.
What's that guy's name?
I don't remember.
It's not Carl. It's not Frank. What's his name? Anyway, he tells the guy who's been like helping him his whole life, like, you're my best friend. Like he still has narcissistic personality disorder. I'm sorry. He's
for sure.
It's so who he is, but he does have moments. But so codependency is like taking on the feelings of other people. I have always struggled with this, but I do practice boundaries. I do have an understanding. I can like recognize that I'm doing something that's codependency. You know what I mean? Like, I see it. Narcissistic parents, on the other hand, are so self-absorbed that they value their own feelings above anybody else's. So they lack empathy and they disregard other people's needs. So it's like the two extremes.
I just, so in the Team Zen app, I just put in 2 words. One is boundaries. And we've done about Zen Talk number 5, podcast 589, podcast 590, Zen Talk 39. So we've done so much work on boundaries, which is great because I think it is something that is super important. And then I just, for fun, I don't remember doing this, but we did a whole podcast on codependency.
Yeah.
Podcast 680, which was not too long ago,
maybe
6 months ago. So, and then 691, we had some codependency stuff going on. So anyways, I just, a lot of the things we're talking about today, we have
talked about
had a deep dive into each one of those things.
It's why it's so easy to recognize in a show like Succession, because it's so blatant.
Yeah.
It's so like, all encompassing. But the reason I'm talking about boundaries in terms of codependency and narcissism is you have to have boundaries for each of these things. If you have a narcissistic parent, you have to know what your boundaries are, because theirs they're not going to stop doing or being who they are.
Yeah.
So you have to know what your limits are.
True.
We, there have been experiences that Todd and I have had with, people who are narcissistic, and we have had to create our own story about, and not even a story, choose our own path. Like, we're going to go do this thing, but we're going to be with this person for this amount of time. And then we're going to end it and we're going to go home, because this person won't end it. This person will ask for more. So we have to have our own
people
boundaries.
You give them an inch, they take a foot.
Right. Exactly. Or a mile. Because foot's not that much, but they'll take a mile.
Well, and an inch is 12 times, a foot is 12 times more than an inch. A mile, there's a lot of inches in a mile.
So what if we do a yard?
No, I like inch foot thing, because I feel like the mile thing is like, I don't know.
I think it's give an inch, take a mile, isn't it?
I don't know.
I think I'm using the phrase, but it doesn't matter, because we
need to figure this out too. This is important. You're right. Give an inch and take a mile.
Yeah.
I'd be damned.
It's not give an inch and take a foot.
Yeah, you're right. What else?
Okay. So here's the thing. Also, this is true with codependency on both sides. You have to have a sense. If you are a parent who feels like you're so over involved in your kids' lives or their emotional lives, or you're just so overly invested and everything is about them, you have to be conscious of your own boundaries. You have to set some boundaries around, I will engage if they ask my opinion, but other times I am going to take a deep breath and allow my children to live their lives. And that can be true if they're 4 years old and they put on a mismatched outfit to go to school.
Skylar.
And that could be true when they are 22 and are making life choices that are very major. We have to honor who they are. And if they ask for advice, of course we give it. But we have to be thoughtful about these things, because, to Todd's point at the beginning of the show, how do our children learn boundaries? By watching us set boundaries. If it comes to, it's
the best learning tool of all time.
Absolutely. And I think when we think about boundaries, we think about that we have to be harsh, or we have to be like, no, their boundaries don't even have to be recognized as boundaries. Like, we don't have to be like, I'm going to set a boundary. We just say things like, for example, I'm supposed to have dinner with this group of friends and I love them dearly, but I'm not great at night. I'm much better during the day. And so my boundary is like, I want to do lunch together, because when I say I'm not great at night, what I mean is I'm just more active and on for a lunch. Do you know what I mean? But if I have to wait till a 7 or 8 o'clock dinner, I'm tired.
Yeah.
I just got asked to speak a couple of weeks ago somewhere in town, and the thing didn't start till 8:30. I'm like, and for me, a work boundary is I can't work that late. I could choose to write that late if I wanted to, but I don't want to wait all day to go to work at 8:30.
Sure.
So those are work boundaries I set up. And these are just small little things. I don't have to tell people. I just say that doesn't work for me, or this would work better. And that's okay. Not every boundary is some insistence on see me, recognize me. It's more about, how do I get through life and feel, again, it goes back to number one, like internally motivated, internally validated by how, my choices and how I'm going to get through life. Like, I have to teach people how to treat me. I can't just walk through life and expect people to know how to treat me. And it's different depending on who you are. Todd was just saying the other day, we got into, it wasn't really an argument, but he was talking about people being sensitive. And he said, you said this person is just like you, Cathy. They kind of expect people to treat them in a certain way or something. What did you say? Do you remember?
No idea.
And I said, wait a second. I don't really expect the world to treat me a certain way, but you, Todd, or my best friends or people close to me, I do let you know, because you're the most important people to me. So I want you to understand me, but I don't walk around the world saying everybody should treat me a certain way, because who has time for that? First of all, for me to explain, and will people even really recognize that or care about that? Because we're not in invested relationships. I'm not in relationships with everybody, but the people I care about the most, I would like them to know that, this is who I am and this is what works best for me.
Yeah. Well, that's just like your opinion, man.
That's right, sweetie. So in closing, the expression "give him an inch and he'll take a mile" has been in use since the late 1800s, though it's derived from a phrase found in John Haywood's 1546 work. So here we are, whatever, 600 years later, 500 years later. But yeah, it comes from John Haywood.
That's
Did you know that we're
interesting.
going to quote John Haywood today?
No, I'm glad he came into
Yeah.
our show today.
Give him an inch and he'll take an L. That's what he said in his book. An L was a unit of measurement for cloth that was about 45 inches in length. So technically, it's a little bit closer to a foot than a mile, but somehow our culture decided to use mile. I stand with my foot. I'm going to stand with my foot.
You and John Haywood.
Me and John Haywood from 1546.
Yeah, I'm glad you've made a new friend.
That's right.
So I'm going to finish this with about boundaries. So boundaries create safety in families. They reflect respect for everyone's needs and feelings. They communicate clear expectations. They establish what's okay to do and what's not. This is okay. This is not. As a child grows up, boundaries should gradually shift to allow for more autonomy. That's where Todd and I are in our parenting, to give our children greater privacy, developing their own beliefs and values and so forth. In healthy families, children are encouraged to become emotionally independent, to separate, to pursue their goals, become themselves, and not be extensions of us. Like I have to, with my girls now, I have 2 adult children.
Yeah.
And I obviously have opinions or thoughts or whatever, but they get to choose. And then I'm the support system. And we've been working up to this since they were in adolescence. Like, This isn't just some dramatic, they turn 18 and we change. Like, as your kids grow up, you've got to give them more autonomy. That's how they develop internal validation. That's how they develop internal motivation. They start to trust themselves.
Yeah. Whatever mistakes do you notice that they're going to make, as long as they're not irreversible, which is whatever, running out in the street when they're 3 years old, that's the stuff you got to be a control freak around. But everything else, that's how we learn, not from when times are good, not when things work out. We learn from when stuff went wrong.
And we learn by that we chose all these experiences. If we are directing our children's lives and we're saying, do this, do that, then anything that does go wrong, they can kind of attribute to it being our fault.
Yeah.
Right. But if our children are making their own decisions, it's interesting, Todd, I think about when we first started parenting and we had little kids. And I remember a discussion that you and I had when we were really starting to talk about emotional labor and your involvement, my involvement. And one of the things that I brought up, and I can't take ownership for this. I think a teacher gave me this, but if I make all the decisions for the kids, then you could so easily blame me.
Sure.
But if we make decisions together, when I say blame me, if something goes wrong or if it doesn't happen the way things should, let me go back to Succession. There's a scene where Rava, who is Kendall's wife, and they have 2 kids, and maybe ex-wife, I think they're divorcing. And Rava shares with Kendall that because the environment has gotten so, the environment being our political environment has gotten so chaotic, that their child, who they have an adopted child, is starting to feel unsafe and has an experience that's really scary on the street. And Kendall says to Rava, well, where were you? Why weren't you there protecting her? When Kendall hasn't seen his kids for months. And just this blaming of, you're doing all the work, so I'm going to blame you for anything that goes wrong. And when we're parenting, we have to co-parent, or else one parent can make the other parent a scapegoat of something.
I have a real world example of this.
Let's hear it.
I don't know how old I was. It was probably 10.
Okay.
I was in Little League. It was the end of the game. My dad went to all my games. This is not a fun memory between my dad and I.
Okay.
And it was towards the end of the game, 7th inning, because I think we played 7 innings at the time. And I was shortstop or whatever. And there was a player that was caught in a rundown. Rundown is when they're stuck between 2 bases.
Yeah.
But there's also a man on third.
Okay.
And I was executing the rundown, and my dad screamed, "Throw home." So what did I do? I threw home, but I threw it either I threw it off the plate, or it was too late. The guy was safe. We ended up losing the game.
That's hard memory.
And my dad, we were both so mad at each other. And I love you, Dad, but he shouldn't have said that. He should have allowed me. But I was always I had my radar on, oh, my dad said something, I'm going to go do it.
Of course.
He should allow me. And he ended up messing me up, because that was not the good choice, because if it was, then I would have thrown him out. So sorry, Dad, you made a mistake. That was a bad day for you.
Well, and we could just focus on that as far as parents do that on the sidelines of games all the time. This
Sure.
isn't just your dad. How many parents are like, run, go there, kick. It just really disconnects a kid from not only their own internal,
Totally.
but from the coach's words.
That's what Silent Saturdays are for.
I know.
We don't do soccer anymore, but we did. But we were part of ASO, and ASO did these things like twice a year.
Is it ASO or AYSO?
People aren't here call it ASO. I
Okay.
grew up saying
Me
AYSO,
too.
American Youth Soccer Organization. And they do these things called Silent Saturdays. And I used to hate them because that means all the parents have to shut up other than clap. That's the
Other
only
than
thing
clap.
they can do.
Yeah.
And then somebody explained to me why they do that. And it's every Saturday should be Silent Saturday because there's so many parents out there telling their kids to kick the ball as if the kid doesn't know that he's supposed to kick the ball. Just be quiet on the sidelines, everybody.
Right, like that they don't know they're supposed
Yeah.
to. There was this parent on the sidelines. This is like 8 years ago, so this parent probably doesn't remember this, but who was saying, "Kick it, get a goal, and I'll take you to Portillo's.
Yeah.
Kick it, get a goal." Like bribing their child while they were
While
in the
they're
game.
on the soccer field.
And can you imagine like that kid or the coach, like the pressure, they can't hear themselves. Then the kid can't play a game
Yeah.
that is connected to their teammates.
Yeah.
They can't play a game that's in the best interest of their team because they're doing what their parent thinks they should do. And the parent doesn't know anything about what those plays are.
Sure.
It's such a that's like a form of enmeshment
Yeah.
right there, where you're like, you are too involved.
Oh,
You
yeah.
need to pull out.
Well, and we're gonna have John O'Sullivan on at some point. He's we've had him on before. We had him at our conference, but I think sports is such an interesting.
Will you explain what John O'Sullivan does so people know what that means?
He's written books on how to guide our children through youth athletics
In a healthy way.
in a healthy way. And we've all seen the YouTube clips. We've probably all been present where these parents get way too invested in what's going on with whether or not their kid wins or loses a baseball game. I remember when I was a little kid, there was parents screaming at the umpire. The umpire was crying. The umpire is like a 14-year-old kid
So wrong.
umping a 10-year-old game. So yeah, I get pretty triggered pretty quickly when I see parents taking youth athletics too
Seriously. And getting too involved.
because it doesn't happen with orchestra. It's not like we're yelling at our kid because they miss a note.
Well, sometimes things happen at home. There are parents who
I guess that's
insist
true.
on practice and insist on playing in front of people and insist on their kids performing.
Yeah.
Like that over involvement, if it's an enmeshment, that where you really don't know where your kid begins and you end, or vice versa, or just imposing our dreams
Sure.
or our expectations on our kids, there are no boundaries there, and
Yeah.
that's not okay. So my last thought about Succession is, Todd, what I thought about because we finished the finale last night. I'm sure a lot of you did. Kendall and Roman and Shiv. Now, Shiv, as we know, is going to have a different experience because of what happens with Tom. But Kendall and Roman are basically left with $1.8 billion, and they're still not okay.
No.
If that doesn't teach you all you need to know
Right.
about what money is,
Yeah.
and that we end that show like thinking, oh my gosh, these poor people.
Yeah.
And they have more money
Than
than
99.9% of humanity.
but they don't know who they are.
No.
And that's what life is about.
Their dad messed them up. It's bottom line.
Yep.
In closing, I want to say hi to Jeremy Kraft. He's a bald-headed beauty. He does painting and remodeling throughout the Chicagoland area. 630-956-1800. Give him a call if you have any projects and you live in Chicago. Cathy has an amazing book called Zen Parenting, Parenting Ourselves and Our Children in an Unpredictable World. I do this thing called Men Living, where we create spaces for guys to connect, heal, and thrive, live deeply, authentic, vulnerable conversations. I also do coaching. So if there's any guys out there that want to do any coaching, hit me up at toddadamscoaching.com. Anything else, sweetie?
I think that's it. Oh, one last thing, because I haven't talked about it for a long time. What about Succession versus Backstreet Boys? Anyway, I have a newsletter that I put out every Friday. It's called Zen Parenting Moment. So I write something. I actually wrote about Succession last week and grief.
Yeah.
And then there's also in the newsletter the things that Todd and I are doing. So all you have to do is go to zenparentingradio.com and subscribe to that newsletter.
And don't forget to join Team Zen, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Actually, Todd, will you put all these things in the show notes?
It's
Then people
all
go,
at the very top of the show notes.
perfect. So all these things we just said, you can find them in the show notes.
Oh.
Now I can see that we're falling apart.
The way that it used to be.
I want you to know that deep down inside.
Love me.